Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Climate Change Committee's new report sets out what this government needs to do to reach its 2045 net zero target. They would have to reduce oil and gas production by 91%, which would devastate the industry and our economy. They would have to ask homeowners to meet stringent and expensive new energy standards. They would have to get more than half the population to drive electric cars or vans by 2035. For cars, the current figure is just 2.2%, and for vans, it's less than 1%. This report lays bare the crippling cost to hard-working families and businesses. Does John Swinney think the committee's proposals are realistic?
First Minister.
So the Government will carefully consider the advice of the Committee on Climate Change before setting out our proposed carbon budgets in secondary legislation in due course. There are obviously a lot of policy proposals within the Committee's recommendations. The Government will consider those. But what I think is absolutely inescapable is that we have got to take action to tackle climate change in our society. That is why the Government is absolutely committed to achieving net zero by 2045, because the implications and the consequences of not doing so are very dramatic and very damaging for Scotland and our economy.
Russell Findlay.
So let's take a look at some of the specific suggestions in this report. To meet the SNP's net zero target, the number of cattle and sheep in Scotland would need to fall by 2 million. A cull of 2 million animals in the next decade. That's around 25%. This would drive farmers out of business, destroy the rural economy and put our food security at risk. The report says that Scots would need to eat 1/3 less meat. This is utter madness. It's an act of national self-harm. Will John Swinney today rule out going ahead with this specific plan?
First Minister.
As I've said, Presiding Officer, the Government will, in an orderly fashion, consider the advice of the Committee on Climate Change and set out our own proposals for taking the action that is absolutely necessary. What I would say to Parliament is that there has been parliamentary consensus around the importance of achieving net zero by 2045. That has been supported across the political spectrum, and the Government will consider specific proposals, bring those forward, and Parliament will have the opportunity to decide on whether those proposals should be approved or not.
Well, there's absolutely no reassurance for farmers in that answer. So let's look at another one of the measures in the report. Fewer than 1% of Scotland's homes have a heat pump, and to meet the SNP's 2045 target, it would need to reach almost 70%. The number of annual installations would need to increase 5-fold in just 5 years' time. That's before we work out how people would afford them, with heat pumps typically costing between £8,000 and £15,000. That proposal is simply not realistic, and if it was imposed, it would hammer hard-working Scots. Will John Swinney please rule it out now?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Findlay talked about reassurance for farmers. As a representative of a constituency that includes many farming members of the community, I take the commitment to support the future of Scottish agriculture very seriously, and it's always been reflected. In my policy priorities. I can tell Parliament what was not reassuring to farmers was the Brexit that Mr Findlay supported, that has damaged the economic opportunities.
Let's hear one another.
It's the
Mr.
Brexit.
Mr. Ross, you have persistently refused to abide by our standing orders, and I would ask you to leave this chamber, and you are excluded for the rest of the day. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the issue of...
Sorry, excuse me, First Minister. Mr. Ross, I have asked you to leave the chamber. Please do so. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the reassurance for farmers was absent in the Brexit that the Conservatives imposed upon us, and it has caused incalculable...
First Minister, Mr Lumsden, please refrain from shouting from your seat. First Minister.
And it's caused incalculable damage on the farming industry in Scotland, and this government is working to repair that damage. The second point I would make is that the targets of reaching net zero by 2045 are not the SNPs, they are Parliament's. Yes. Democratically agreed by Parliament, because we all recognised the importance of climate action. Now, what we see just now, and it's very obvious what we're seeing in front of us, is the Conservatives deserting the action that's necessary on climate for cheap political opportunity. This government will act. This government will do what it always does, act in the best interests of the people of Scotland and secure the future of our country.
Russell Findlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I can only share my colleagues' frustration at this weekly exercise in deflection and evasion. The SNP have missed their eco-targets for years. Their expert advisers now confirm that the only way to reach net zero by 2045 is by imposing radical and financially devastating policies. If John Swinney sticks to his target, he has to be honest with the people of Scotland about the price he expects them to pay. People will be forced to ditch petrol cars, rip out their boilers and change their diets. Farmers would need to get rid of cattle. Scotland's oil and gas industry would cease to exist. All of this to be paid through higher taxes and higher household bills. None of this makes sense to people in the real world. It's just not realistic or affordable. And does John Swinney agree, or will he continue making promises he knows the SNP cannot keep?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, between 1990 and 2022, Scotland's emissions halved, while the economy grew by 66.6%. Now, I cite that information to say to Parliament that it is possible for us to grow our economy and reduce our emissions by sensible investment. What does that sensible investment involve? It involves supporting the transition to renewable energy, and I mean the transition to renewable energy, where we manage carefully the way in which we generate our energy by attracting investment, which
Let's hear the First Minister.
Which we are successfully doing to secure the energy future of our country. That is the commitment of the Scottish Government, to make sure that we deliver a just transition, that we grow the economy, and that we always take the action to protect the interests of the people of Scotland. We will do that in the SNP Government, while the Conservatives play politics with the opportunists.